figure out what it is that Bannon personally thinks. But I don't really care what he believes in his heart. I'm here to explain what he is philosophically doing. Steve, the color of your soul is between you and God, but your ass belongs to me.
Why do we build the wall? We build the wall to keep us free. That's why we build the wall. We build the wall to keep us free.
In 2010, Bannon wrote and directed a strange little film called Generation Zero about the financial crisis, a favourite topic of his that he brings up whenever he speaks at live events. The thesis is somewhat garbled, but in essence, the film claims that the 2008 financial crash was the culmination of a destined cycle of history that repeats roughly every 100 years, always ending in a crisis from which the next cycle begins. This is called Strauss-Howe generational theory, or the fourth turning, and it isn't widely believed to be true or a useful way of doing history, but it does make for a nice dramatic framing device, so points for style, I guess. That's just the flavour though. The real claim is that the crash was caused by baby boomers' lack of moral character, as opposed to anything else. Bannon says that his generation grew up in the 60s, they became selfish, narcissistic, entitled hippies, and when they inherited the levers of political and economic control, they made risky moves, they forgot all about personal responsibility, and they screwed it up for everyone else. This analysis of the financial crash is very similar to the one put forward by PragerU. If you've ever heard of them, a lot of ideas in common between them and Bannon. If you haven't ever heard of them, then lucky old you, don't worry about it. Moreover, the film claims that they, by which it variously denotes politicians in general, financiers in general, baby boomers, elites, the Democratic Party and President Obama, made things worse after the crash by bailing out the banks with taxpayer money rather than letting them fail. Even though it was actually George W. Bush's government who did that, not Obama. This is a falsehood that Bannon repeats in his speech at Oxford University and in his debate with David Frum in Toronto. Now, he is critical of old-school Republicans like Bush and Democrats, so ideologically it's not a huge deal. In fact, in the Frum debate, he correctly says at the start that it was Bush and then contradicts himself later on, but it's maybe worth noting that he is leading his audience to be critical of Democrats in particular. But the basic thesis of the film seems simple enough, you might say. The financial crisis was a problem not of capitalism, but of character, as the film's tagline puts it. And whether you believe that, or whether you're correct, it's a nice hot take, and it makes for some good #content. However, within that basic thrust, the film also contains some stunning leaps of absolute moon logic. At various points, it implies, without outright stating, that the financial crash was the culmination of a decades-long deliberate plot by leftists to crash the American economy in order to instigate revolution, that it was the fault of black civil rights activists who made white bankers afraid to deny loans to black subprime borrowers for fear of being called racist, and that Bill Clinton's Democratic Party was trying to make the United States part of a new global world order, which is vague and undefined and then just never mentioned again. None of these claims are backed up by any kind of evidence, and you're not really supposed to notice that because they're more implied than outright stated, and this tactic is used throughout. For instance, at one point the film says that there was a plot in the 60s by two academics named Cloward and Piven to deliberately crash the American economy by signing loads of people up to welfare. And then it just leaves this hanging. It never gets brought up again, but the implication is that the crash of '08 might have had something to do with it. But what Cloward and Piven actually wrote in a public magazine article was that a lot of people who were eligible for welfare weren't getting it. And so if everybody who was eligible could be encouraged to actually sign up, that would be a good way of getting the federal government to pay more attention to poverty. And that's it. They just wrote an article about it. There's no evidence I can find that anybody ever used it as a blueprint for organised action. Certainly no evidence that anybody held onto it in a desk drawer for 42 years until they got into a position to crash the economy. But you're not really meant to notice that when you watch Steve Bannon's film. It's just like, ooh, spooky leftists! It's all presented as this Manichean, preordained struggle with the destined cycle of history and this bombastic, super serious tone, storm clouds, scary music, threatening graphics. It's like reading the Book of Revelations. There's this feeling of cosmic cataclysm and drama, but at the same time, it's really vague and just, it's kind of bullshit. It's overwhelming trying to keep up with it. Points get made and then dropped and restated later but never developed. Very often, huge claims get made out of nowhere really quickly, like a truck screaming past you in the dark. If you're thinking of watching the film to have a laugh or just to see the weirdness for yourself, I would honestly say skip it. It's not fun. The effect is just exhausting. All the more so because from a technical standpoint, the film just isn't all that good. The stock footage and the animations look pretty cheap. The endless shots of statues and monuments get old fast. The sound editing is really choppy. It's repetitive. The chapter markers are more confusing than helpful. It's repetitive. The imagery is often painfully over the top. It's repetitive, and it's repetitive. Sometimes Steve Bannon's film is just flat out wrong or bizarre. Of the financial crisis, it asks, how could so many authorities have failed to predict this, ignoring the fact that some people actually did? Ann Pettifor, for one, is a left-wing economist who predicted the financial crash in detail several years before it actually happened, but nobody listened. Presumably because her Wikipedia picture is so spooky! When discussing the 60s and counterculture, the film conspicuously omits any of the reasons why people were actually rebelling against things like the Vietnam War and white supremacy. Instead, it says, cultures change because elites come up with ideas that then filter down into the culture. They come through the newspapers. They come through the mainstream pulpit. They come through the universities and then down into the grammar schools. They come through the TV. They come through the movies. They come through popular music even. Anyone else smell petrol? Have you heard about these arson attacks? Dreadful. Simply dreadful. Here it says, family of 4 burned alive. 2 little girls and a mother and father charred to a crisp, and they've no idea who did it. Mind you, I hardly ever read the newspapers. Load of old nonsense most of the time. I've never met a journalist I could trust, but just occasionally I do like to indulge. I like to read the horoscopes. What's your sign? Oh, let's see what the future has in store. With Mercury in retrograde, your energies are depleted. Beware of old friends or lovers who may be mocking you behind your back. You will strive for success, but until you make a breakthrough in yourself, you will not attain it. Powerful energies swarm around you. By paying the proper attention, you can learn to harness them. Oh, you must be somebody very special. But even though the film is intellectually and technically pretty shoddy, it's still very effective and affective. So why? There is one bit of Generation Zero that is absolute genius. The bit where it says, ordinary Americans know what's going on. They aren't fooled, they're outraged. And again, it provides no evidence for this. No polls, no surveys of what Americans think, not even an explanation of what it is that ordinary Americans supposedly know and are outraged about. It just says it. And this is what philosophers call constructing a public. We might think that the public just exists somewhere, just out there, but really, when we talk about the public, we create an idea of it, and then actual members of the public get affected by what they think the public wants. We see this all the time. In the UK especially, newspapers will say things like, concerns have been raised, but they won't say who raised those concerns, or what they are. You just read it and you go, oh damn, concerns? I also have concerns. I don't know what I'm concerned about, but I guess I'll find out later. In the meantime, better keep buying more newspapers and shitting on trans people. Constructing publics is very important for understanding populism, which is politics that's all about the people versus the elites. There's a lot of technical debate in philosophy about whether populism counts as an ideology or not. Personally, I lean more towards saying that it's a style, since anybody can do it. If you're very clever, you'll already have noticed that even though populist is usually used to describe people on the right wing, like Steve Bannon, you could have left-wing populism. You could even have centrist populism. The devil is in how you define these two groups. But the other feature of populism is that these are moral groupings, not just descriptive ones. The people, whoever they are good. And the elites, well, concerns have been raised. There's also a lot of debate about where populism came from and who is or isn't a populist. Some people have argued that Tony Blair was pretty populist when he was Prime Minister, but Tony Blair himself has since founded the Tony Blair Institute, one of whose stated goals is to combat populism. So, We might want